I-24 News, exclusive details of Israel's billion-dollar infrastructure rebuilding plan for the Gaza Strip. Plus, President Trump will allow the release of a secret surveillance memo that triggered a bitter battle between the White House and the FBI. Also, the Assad regime in Syria is reportedly developing new kinds of chemical weapons. And quiet protests on the streets of Iran, where women are defying the ultra-religious government by removing their headscarves.
From the I-24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clearcut with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Tal Heinrich in for Michelle today. We begin with new information on Israel's billion-dollar plan to rebuild infrastructure on the Gaza Strip under the condition that the Palestinian Authority takes over control from Hamas. Correspondent Elon Levy has the exclusive report.
$1 billion. That's what Israel told the international community it will cost to save the Gaza Strip from humanitarian collapse. Israel presented the list of projects to major donor countries to the Palestinian Authority in Brussels, and now I-24 News can exclusively reveal its details. The document reveals a new desalination plant in the Gaza Strip will cost $710 million, with $250 million still needed. That's designed to relieve severe water shortages in Gaza, where most of the groundwater is contaminated with sewage and seawater. But that money needs to come from international donors. They're also asked to pay for water reclamation, sewage treatment, and even squeezing water from humidity in the air. As for Gaza's protracted energy crisis, the document highlights ambitious international plans that need cash. Israel has approved connecting the Gaza Strip to natural gas from Israeli gas fields. That's meant to meet Gaza's energy needs and dramatically reduce costs to the Palestinian Authority. But for now, that project needs $80 million. And until then, Israel wants to connect Gaza to a new power line, almost doubling its electricity supply to the Palestinian enclave. That needs $36 million from donors, and over $30 million are needed to meet Gaza's growing power demands through solar energy. Also revealed, Israel is looking into expanding the Erez pedestrian crossing with the Gaza Strip to accommodate the transfer of goods. Today, goods can only go through the Kerem Shalom crossing, but saving Gaza's economy means expanding its capacity to sell to the outside world. Norway and the European Union called the emergency meeting of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee in Brussels to encourage talks towards a two-state solution. But for Israel, the humanitarian crisis is attracting more immediate attention. This week, the UN Special Envoy warned Gaza is on the brink of total collapse.
We're on the verge of a total systems failure in Gaza, with the full collapse of the economy, the social services, political, humanitarian and security implications stemming from that.
But Israel's regional cooperation minister told diplomats the plans can only go ahead if the Palestinian Authority takes back full civil control of Gaza from Islamist terror group Hamas. Those reconciliation talks are stuck, leaving those urgent humanitarian plans needing scarce money and even scarcer political will. Elon Levy, I-24 News.
Now, to further discuss this, let's bring in Asaf Romirovsky, a fellow at the Middle East Forum. He's live in Philadelphia tonight. Asaf, thank you for joining us. Well, Israel puts forward this ambitious plan to rehabilitate and stabilize Gaza, and it says we need two things to happen in order to actually follow through. One is money from donors, and the second is that the Palestinian Authority will take control of Gaza. Do you believe that this can actually happen?
Well, it's wishful thinking to see this. I mean, it's a nice plan altogether. But if you remember, let's go back to 2005, after the Israel disengaged from Gaza. The infrastructure that was left in Gaza back in 2005 was to make Palestinian society independent. After that did not happen, Hamas, of course, took over. The Islamist agenda took over, and instead of using the resources, they were using the resources to build tunnels, which we're still seeing today. Now they're in a catch-22 where we're facing a crisis. We're seeing a freeze of funds that was done by the current administration in order to hold the Palestinian Authority accountable, which I think is very positive. But of course, Hamas is taking an opportunity here to say that, of course, Gaza is starving. They can't operate the hospitals, and Israel is pushed into this situation once again in order to deal with the situation at large. However, the Palestinian Authority is basically impotent and not capable to actually deal with its own problems vis-a-vis Hamas and the Islamist elements that are in the Gaza Strip. So it's a pull and push situation here that Israel is forced to deal with.
Well, Asaf, you know, some Israeli politicians believe that this is the right path for real peace if we're talking about economic solutions. Do you believe that this could happen? Because we do see it in Israel and the Palestinian Authority in some respect. There are certain Israeli brands selling in Ramallah, for example. Is it the right way to go, in your personal view?
Well, in some respect, yes. I mean, look, Salam Fayyad, when he was the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority, probably took Palestinian society as far as it could have gone, absent the corruption. And Fayyad had an understanding of a free market and economies and building up Palestinian society. So in the West Bank, that worked well. The Gaza Strip is a whole other ballgame. And what you have now is you have an Islamist regime under Hamas, which is using the ideology in order to abuse its own population. And so because the Palestinian Authority is weak in that area, they're always demanding more and more support, and in order to further and make the economy go further. Now, these are not to say new ideas. I mean, go back to 2000, we had a Saudi proposal of trying to infuse the economy, build condos on the coast of Gaza, trying to facilitate a skill set and move Palestinian society within Gaza further. These attempts have been done time and time again. The question is also a question of, is Palestinian society able and capable to put aside the ideology and the rhetoric and the Islamist narrative and to govern its own people? And part of that is also making and strengthening the Palestinian Authority. Currently, Mahmoud Abbas is pretty weak, represents a small kitchen cabinet. He still controls all the money. There's still a problem of jobs. And now the blame of a lack of an infrastructure is blamed not on the Palestinians, but rather on the outside world, which has always been done. And, of course, the Israelis. So that's how we're pulled back into this. Now, it's not to say that it's not positive for Israel for the Palestinian society to have a valuable infrastructure, but there's not enough desire and within that community to make that happen. It's still easier to be a victim and blame everybody else for the current situation, a la what we saw now when the United States froze the money to UNRWA. So, of course, everybody is crying poverty, and there is no gas to run the generators. Hospitals can't run, even though they still got $60 million, and European countries are still re-upping their money in order to put in money into the situation.
Asaf, just briefly, this meeting in Brussels also, because you mentioned the United States, also marked the first time since Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital that U.S. representatives and Palestinian representatives met for face-to-face. What do you make of it? How important is it? Isn't the rift so deep?
The rift is deep. But the rift did not start because of Trump's announcement. There has been a consistent refusal by the Palestinian Authority to have direct negotiations with officials of the government of Israel. This has been a consistent strategy of internationalizing the conflict, going through the United Nations and going through other European proxies. Without having actual conversations between the two parties coming together, you will not be able to parachute any kind of agreement to change the arena. That needs to happen. So regardless of Trump's announcement, which was not earth-shattering to begin with, I mean, according to American law, been done since 1995. And so, again, there has to be an actual realization. You have to sit together to actually have a conversation. Absent that, you're going to be in this limbo situation.
Thank you so much for weighing in, Middle East Forum fellow Asaf Romarovsky. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And straight ahead here on Clearcut, releasing the memo. House Republicans may be close to getting their wish, why Democrats are crying foul. Plus, a new chemical attack, why the U.S. says Syria could be developing even more weapons. And the diplomatic crisis fallout from Poland's controversial Holocaust bill, how Israel and the U.S. are reacting.
Esta semana en News 24, pense en Israel. Jerusalén es la capital del Estado judío. Venezuela, socialismo caótico en una sociedad en crisis. Entrevista exclusiva, Gabriela Michetti, vicepresidenta de Argentina. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de I-24 News.
I'm Lauren Izzo on I-24 News. Join me on high definition right here for an in-depth understanding of Israel's diverse society through groundbreaking documentaries.
Join Lauren Izzo at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Emily Francis on I-24 News. Join us on Trending right here on the show that shines the light on the many amazing people doing positive work to inspire. This is the show about building bridges.
Weekdays at 8 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to Clearcut. The showdown over the so-called Nunes memo may be coming to a head. A senior White House official said the president will likely give Congress the okay tomorrow to make it public. Correspondent Tara Palmieri has more.
The memo was written by Republican staffers on the House Intel Committee. It apparently argues that the FBI abused its authority when it obtained a warrant to tap the phones of a campaign aide to Donald Trump.
For anybody to be able to spy on American citizens, you should have a very, very high bar to be able to satisfy before you do that.
In a rare statement, the FBI wrote that they have, quote, grave concerns about making the memo public. In a break with the House GOP, the third-ranking Republican in the Senate asked that the Senate Intel Committee read it first before the president tells Congress to release it.
What this memo is Congress doing its job in conducting legitimate oversight.
On Tuesday, President Trump seemed eager to get the memo out.
Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah, don't worry. 100%.
Democratic leaders have asked House Speaker Paul Ryan to intervene and stop its release. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is now demanding that the House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes be removed from the committee. Ranking Democratic member Adam Schiff accused Nunes of changing the memo after the Intel Committee voted on its release.
The memo is seriously misleading because it omits very material information and has deep factual inaccuracies. And what the White House is considering is not precisely what we voted out, and it just goes to show you the problems when you are doing this for partisan reasons.
That was Tara Palmieri reporting. For more, let's go to senior national correspondent Michael Shore, live from LA, and senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv in DC. Dan, let's start with you. Democrats are certainly not happy about this, and they're going after the source, Devin Nunes.
I would say that they really have Donald Trump in mind. I mean, you're quite right. It is that chairman of the House Republicans, of the House Intelligence Committee, the Republican Nunes, who put together this memo and apparently is putting out the word that it's really important. So other members of Congress, Republicans, are saying it's alarming to find out what the FBI did to launch this Russia collusion investigation. But the Democrats are really thinking about President Trump. If he really does on Friday approve releasing this memo, maybe redacting some things that are classified, then according to the Democrats, that's Trump trying to fight the special prosecutor, trying to undermine the whole investigation, Trump just acting in defense of Trump. Democrats say it's all unfair and that the special prosecutor should be let alone to do his job. Tal.
Michael Shore, as Dan just said, Democrats also saying that President Trump wants to use this memo to undermine the Russia investigation. What do you make of this? Is it a dangerous road for the president to take?
It may be the only route he has to take in some aspects, Tal. I think that that's absolutely true, though. I think when you see the popularity of Mueller in polling, the idea that they're trying, that the American people are trying to support this FBI investigation, and what the Trump people want to do, well, they want to see it end. And the polling also suggested that Donald Trump, were he to fire Robert Mueller, would suffer the brunt of that firing. It would not help his cause. So what do? You go after the integrity of the investigation. You go after Rod Rosenstein, who is the overseer of this investigation on the part of the Justice Department. If Donald Trump can get rid of Rod Rosenstein, then he has an easier avenue either to fire Mueller himself or to put someone in place of Rosenstein who could do that. This is all about undermining this investigation, which is not only hampering his ability to lead, but also may hamper his presidency in and of itself.
And Michael, there's been some speculation about FBI Director Christopher Wray and whether he'll still be in that job once this is over. What's going on there? Is the FBI taking stance in a political fight?
Well, they are taking a stance. I think that Christopher Wray, as the head of the FBI, sees sees the impugning of his agency, and he stands at its defense. He has, according to White House officials, said that he will threaten to resign should the president tomorrow or tonight, perhaps even later tonight, release this memo. So Wray is standing by the FBI. The question he has to decide really is this the big story or is the big story later? And should he stand in defense of the FBI as Mueller hands down indictments? That's something that only Wray knows, but just the fact that the head of the FBI put in place there after James Comey was removed from that space, who got a confirmation with 95 votes in the U.S. Senate, is considering stepping down. That's pretty big, Tal.
Of course. Dan, what do you think is in the memo?
Well, it is secret, as you heard. It's up to President Trump to say, okay, the classification's not a problem. But according to members of Congress, Republicans, of course, who want to stress all the alarming things that are in it, it says that in the fall of 2016, when U.S. authorities went to a special court to get permission for surveillance, to wiretap, to intercept the communications of one particular person in the Trump campaign that was based on false evidence, unreliable evidence. That one person, Carter Page. You've seen him on TV giving sort of wacky answers. You're not sure where he was. Well, apparently there was a suspicion he might be an agent for the Russians. And so the Republicans are going to try to prove that Rod Rosenstein and others went to the special court with evidence, a lot of it from the dossier about Trump and his activities in Russia, which according to the Republicans is all false. But Democrats say, oh, yeah? Let's find out if the dossier is false. It is two clashing narratives.
So many documents involved there. And then House Republicans have approved it. The president has promised it. Is there any chance this doesn't get released?
Well, I suppose there is a chance that President Trump thinks, in fact, it could be more damaging to his cause. But I think he will. I think he has persuaded himself that it's going to help him undermine the FBI investigation. And here's an important quote, something the president said recently: just because I'm fighting back, that's not obstruction of justice. He does intend to keep fighting the investigation, Tal.
That's a key sentence there. Dan Raviv, Michael Shore, thank you so much for this. And still ahead here on Clearcut, Syria, and chemical weapons, the new evidence that suggests the Assad regime is still using them and may be adding more. And the terror list, the new groups in the crosshairs of the United States and what it means for them.
I'm David Schuster on I-24 News. Join us on Stateside. It's our channel's flagship broadcast, and it features our best reporting and analysis of news from around the world and from here in the United States.
Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Strictly Security. Your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts. Analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, 5:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know. Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to Clearcut. Syria's government may be developing new chemical weapons for use in its 7-year-old civil war. Scientists have linked the regime to the use of lethal sarin gas. For more, let's bring in senior diplomatic correspondent Nina Larson at the UN headquarters. Nina, what's new about this report?
Well, what's new, Tal, is something that's going to be very decisive here at the United Nations going forward. The UN had its own investigative team, but this is from an independent group, the OPCW. That's the best regarded experts in the world on chemical weapons, and they now have physical evidence linking the Assad regime to sarin gas attacks this year and last year inside Syria, including that notorious attack on the town of Khan Sheikhoun last March. But the thing is here, this is going to really put Russia in the spotlight again, because Russia has time and time again now derailed the UN's own investigation into this matter with their veto power.
And the regime is actively adding to its stockpile?
Yes, there are reports now citing Trump administration officials, Tal, saying that not only is Assad persisting in using chemical weapons, but he's actually also developing them at the same time. And again, this is going to cause tremendous frustration from the world and from the US about Russia.
Russia does have influence, but Russia is making the wrong choice. It's making the choice not to use its unique influence with the Syrian regime, to allow the Syrian regime to use chemical or other weapons against its people, yet again, is absolutely unconscionable. We have seen, 12 million refugees forced to flee that country over the past several years. It's absolutely horrific.
Nina, for those Syrians fleeing this level of violence here in the United States, relief for now, right?
That's right. There's been a development, Tal. About 7,000 Syrian refugees are living in the United States. They've come here from 2012 onwards under what's known as a temporary protected status. Now, that status was up for review in the past couple of days, and the Trump administration has extended it for a further 18 months. But basically, if you come into the country before August of last year, you're fine. But if you're coming in recent months, or you're trying to come in now, you're not going to be able to under this particular status.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens after these 18 months. Nina Larson, thank you for this. The U.S. government has declared 4 new specially designated global terrorists. You've probably never heard of most of the new groups on the list, but the decision could have serious consequences to the way they operate. Senior defense correspondent Chai Ben-Ari has more.
The U.S. State Department has announced that 4 militant entities are now considered specially designated global terrorists. One of these entities is a person, Ismail Haniyeh, the president of the Hamas Political Bureau, a well-known figure in the Middle East. Avigdor Lieberman once claimed Haniyeh would be killed within 48 hours if he ever became defense minister, assuming Haniyeh didn't agree to return captive Israelis. Lieberman has been defense minister now for over a year and a half. Haniyeh is alive and well. Hamas still holds Israelis captive. The other entities designated as terrorists are less familiar. One is a Palestinian group known as Harakat al-Sabarin. This group operates out of the West Bank and Gaza. Many of its members formerly belonged to Islamic Jihad, including the organization's leader, Hisham Salim.
Palestine is ours, and we affirm our right to Palestine. This occupation is near its end, God willing, and we will continue our resistance until we liberate Palestine from the river to the sea.
The group has launched rockets at Israel out of Gaza and has also attacked Israeli army forces with explosives and gunfire. The U.S. says al-Sabarin receives orders from Iran, though its leader has rejected this. It is a Shiite jihadist movement. Al-Sabarin's flag is almost identical to that of Hezbollah, another Iranian proxy organization. The group is known to Israeli authorities, but does not appear on an official Israeli list of terror organizations. The other 2 entities to be designated operate out of Egypt and focus their violence against the government of that country. Among other attacks, Liwa al-Thawra claimed responsibility for the assassination of an Egyptian general in October of 2016. Harakat Sawad Misr, or Hassam, has claimed responsibility for attacks on religious targets, security figures, and diplomatic institutions in Egypt. Leaders from both Egyptian groups were formerly tied to the Muslim Brotherhood organization, which briefly controlled the country in 2012 and 2013. The decision to designate these entities as terrorists serves as a gesture towards two key U.S. allies in the Middle East, Israel and Egypt, as well as a further departure from the policy of the Obama administration to seek engagement with both Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. Shai Ben-Ari, I-24 News.
Let's bring in Oz Sultan joining us here on set, a counterterrorism expert. Oz, welcome back on the program. By recognizing Ismail Haniyeh as a terrorist, the U.S. is basically telling the Palestinians, we make no difference between the political wing and the military wing of Hamas. Why is that important?
Well, I think that the move by the United States is designed to do a couple of things. I mean, when the elections were allowed and Hamas was voted in, they were really the opposition party at that time. Since those elections, what we've seen with Hamas is really no change in status quo. And we've seen a lot of maneuvering, I think, not just by the Israelis, but other partners inside of the region to kind of figure out what can we do to really bring things to normalized relations. So I think very much like the Jerusalem Declaration by President Trump, this is really a move to say, listen, we are ready to move towards peace. We would like to move towards peace. What exactly are the Palestinian terms to do so? Those could be put on the table, but at the same point in time, let's try and take some of the actors out of the conversation who have really impeded this process for a long period of time.
So it seems like the Trump administration is very eager with its approach on the Middle East to define who is a friend, who is an enemy, levels of enemies. Is it right? Is
well,
it so?
I think it's really more just redefining who can play inside of the sandbox and who can't, right? Because what we've got is, you know, Haniyeh and a lot of his ilk, I mean, I think they mean well. I think they end up doing poorly, right? And I think from the perspective of ties to certain organizations on an international scale, it's not boding very well. So if we look at this from the security perspective, I think, of the GCC, the security perspective of Israel, it is a move in the right direction. And then on top of this, in terms of just helping the Palestinian Authority define where they're going next, you know, we've had really impotent leadership since the 70s, going really back to Arafat. So I think this move allows the Palestinians to basically say, all right, maybe we can kind of start defining some new terms, but at the same point in time underscores the efforts by the Trump administration and really the United States to say, listen, we're not playing anymore.
All these groups, including Hamas and Ismail Haniyeh, of course, on that list, this latest addition to the list, are somewhat connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. Shai Ben-Ari also touched on it in his report. Why do you think the Trump administration has not yet recognized the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, in the greater definition of the Muslim Brotherhood, not only parts of it, as a terrorist organization?
The problem with the Muslim Brotherhood is it's a political party, it is a charitable organization, it is a terror organization all in one, and it's spread across many, many different countries. You know, if you go to the north, it's political. If you go to Egypt, it's terror. If you go in some of these countries that have been destabilized, they're providing humanitarian efforts. So the problem is that because there isn't really a definite declaration that can be made as to what they are, I think the United States is being a little bit cagey on this and is taking time in making these decisions.
Oz Sultan, thank you so much for your insights here tonight. And still ahead on Clearcut, America's oil boom. The United States set to catch the world's leading crude producers. What's driving the rally? Plus, the flu outbreak, new concerns over the deadly epidemic in the United States, those stories and more when Clearcut continues in 60 seconds.
In the Holy Land, there are wonders most people never get to see. I-24 News will take you inside the shadows and unravel the secrets of some of the world's most revered sites in a way you've never experienced. All access from every angle. Tune in to Sacred Sites 360, Sunday 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Tracy Alexander for I-24 News. Join us on Perspectives and get the whole picture as we break down the day's top stories from all angles.
to Clearcut. I'm Tal Heinrich in for Michelle McCory today. Let's get you caught up on some of the stories making headlines in the Middle East tonight. 2 rockets fired from northern Syria hit the Turkish border town of Kilis. 5 people were wounded. Turkish authorities say Kurdish militias fired the rockets. The Kurds have been under siege by Turkish troops in the border region for almost 2 weeks. In Syria, 2 children were killed in the shelling of a suburb of Damascus. A human rights monitor says 10 other people were hurt by the government bombing. More than 200 civilians were killed in eastern Ghouta in January alone. And the head of the Arab League Council says the U.S. funding cut to Palestinian aid puts stability at risk. The council held an emergency meeting in Cairo to discuss Jerusalem. The head of the group said that they are looking for other ways to support Palestinians in Gaza. The European Union joined the uproar against Poland's new Holocaust bill. The controversial law passed to the Polish Senate. It would make it illegal to blame or accuse the nation of being complicit in the Holocaust. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim explains.
Israel thought it had a friend in the right-wing Polish government. But Israeli leaders have their limits, even in Europe, where friends are hard to find. Legislation that passed the Polish Senate on Wednesday would criminalize implicating Poland in being complicit with the Holocaust. And Holocaust revisionism is something Israel is not willing to put up with.
I see with gravity the Holocaust law legalized by the Poles. I see it as an attempt to deny their responsibility to everything that has happened to Jews in Poland during the Holocaust. This morning, I requested the Prime Minister to immediately order, as a Prime Minister and a Foreign Minister, the return of the Israeli ambassador to Poland for consultations.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's closest rival for the premiership had most of his family wiped out in the Holocaust and has questioned Netanyahu's wisdom in befriending countries like Poland, where anti-Semitism still rears its head. Some believe Poland's overtures toward Israel are a cover for legislation like this.
No bill can rewrite history. Poles were accomplices to the Holocaust. Poles snitched on Jews, Poles participated in the Nazi killing machine. And trying to write a bill now that says otherwise is just an example to the fact that anti-Semitism today lives and burns within modern Poland. And we're going to object to it in any way possible.
While there were tens of thousands of Poles who risked their own lives to save Jews from the Nazi death machine, there is indisputable evidence that many Poles helped Germany carry out its final solution.
We're talking about 250,000 of Polish Jews who tried to flee the Nazis. They fled camps, ghettos, trains, and they tried to find shelter within the Polish society. The problem is that most of them didn't meet the righteous among the nations. And current research shows us that many of those Jews were killed, not because of the Germans. Sometimes they were handed to the Germans, but by Polish citizens, by Poles who found them.
Over half of Israel's parliament has responded by co-sponsoring legislation making Poland's bill an illegal form of Holocaust denial. And it seems a relationship that Netanyahu worked so hard to build is crumbling. Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
And now a live look at the Nasdaq building here in Times Square. It was a mixed day for U.S. stocks. The Nasdaq dropped 1/3%, while the Dow gained 0.1%, and the S&P was off fractionally. American oil companies are ramping up production and quickly catching up with the world's top crude producers. A big part of the shift in global oil power has to do with fracking. I-24 News correspondent Asher Wastrup-Evans has more.
American oil exports are booming, and a battle for black gold is raging. Back in 2014, Saudi-led OPEC, a global oil cartel, decided to flood the markets with cheap oil to drive US producers out of business. The plan backfired. Oil prices dropped to record lows, and OPEC, working with Russia, changed tack, cutting oil output 20% from 2016 to 17.
I am pleased to announce that the decision has been unanimous to roll over and extend the deal through December of 2018.
Using the resurgent shale drilling technology known as fracking, the US stayed in the market and today has positioned itself as an oil superpower, with its output closing in on oil powerhouse nations Saudi Arabia and Russia. President Trump is attempting to increase offshore drilling and loosen regulations on fossil fuels. Today, global oil prices are rallying, hovering close to $70 a barrel. Far from the Saudi oil embargoes of the 1970s, which caused immense turmoil in the US economy, this US surge has given pause to OPEC nations unsure of how to combat this energy-independent America.
I think that the outlook for when we will hit the balanced market will be clearer in June, and we will start thinking of what do we do in 2019.
Yet, as American producers enjoy high production and rallying prices, analysts predict the good times won't last forever.
People who I've spoken to in the shale markets and the shale operation tend to suggest that while shale is obviously still a thorn in OPEC's side, that the production side of it is maybe getting towards some level of peak.
So, the question remains, can the US maintain its immense output and continue to strive for energy independence and global oil dominance? Or will OPEC and its allies be forced to work alongside a burgeoning, independent US oil industry? Asher Westrop-Evans, I-24 News.
For more on that, let's bring in Stuart Glickman, an energy analyst. Stuart, he's live tonight via Skype, right? Let's begin with the question asked at this report that we just saw. How long do you believe that the celebration will last? Can the United States be energy independent for many more years?
It's a good question. I think that U.S. production over the next, call it 2 to 3 years, is likely to continue to increase. The break-even prices for U.S. producers in places like the Permian Basin in West Texas and New Mexico, or the Eagle Ford Shale in South Texas, those are still in, call it, the $35 to $40 per barrel range. So at these prices today, $65 per barrel, it's highly economical to continue producing, and I think that's exactly what they're going to be doing.
And according to new data released by the government yesterday, U.S. oil production broke 10 million barrels a day for the first time in 48 years in November. To what extent would you give the president credit for it?
Actually, I give almost no credit to the president. In the same way that I give almost no credit to former President Obama for that, the rapid increase that we've seen over the last, call it 10 years. Keep in mind,
who would you give the credit to?
So really, I have to give the credit to the engineers, because really, this technological innovation that you talked about in the previous segment, fracking, really it's the marriage of two technologies. You have the marriage of fracking along with the innovation of horizontal drilling, and you put the two of those together, and that enables you to rapidly increase production. Just for historical context, back in 2008, U.S. production was around 5 million barrels a day. So U.S. production has doubled in about 10 years, and really it's because of technological innovation in the oil field.
So we're talking about this shale oil boom now, where the fracking gets all the spotlight, this new technology. But how long can this go?
So it's really a function of price, and one of the facets of U.S. tight oil production, which is really the source of most of that ramp up in the last few years, that production is very price responsive, because you can drill a well and complete it in, say, the Permian Basin and get to first production in a matter of months. So if prices move north like they have been in recent months, it's very easy for a producer to line up a new rig, line up a fracking crew, and get to work again. So I think as long as prices stay high, it's going to encourage U.S. production.
But what about regulation in this field of shale oil? Will this be a problem?
So it depends on where you're drilling. Not a lot of U.S. production is actually on federal land. A lot of it is on state or private land. The biggest issue that you would have from a regulation standpoint is likely regulatory responsiveness to some kind of major accident. In the same way that there was a moratorium following the 2010 explosion on the Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico, where the U.S. decided to shut down all offshore drilling for about 6 months. I think it would take some kind of major calamity on that kind of scale to make a major shift in regulation.
I know you don't give the credit to the president, but I want to take it back to the president because he said in the State of the Union address, we are now very proudly an exporter of energy to the world. But what about imports?
So the U.S. is a net importer of some oil. So particularly from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East in general, that produces a lot of somewhat light oil, and that is brought into the country. The overall level of net imports has been dropping over time. We're not quite yet at the point where the U.S. would be a net exporter, but I think that day is eventually coming.
So what do you see as the major challenges that this industry is now facing or about to face?
So you have to keep in mind that the U.S. producers are very fragmented. There are thousands and thousands of producers. Obviously, not all of them are massive size, but in general, it's a fragmented industry. There's not a lot of coordination between those players, and the incentive to continue to drill and to continue to outspend your cash flows because external capital is always available, that incentive is very strong. And this is an industry that historically has very frequently outspent its cash flows. I think if they have some longer term thinking, they'll produce a little bit less than they could, and that should keep prices high. But if they do what they've always done in the past, which is produce too much, that's going to cause prices to relapse again, and then we could go back into the 50s or the 40s.
And we don't want that. Energy analyst Stuart Glickman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
There are new concerns about what has become the worst flu season in years. Officials are confirming more children have died from the epidemic. Correspondent Linda Lopez has more.
In Georgia, another flu-related child death now confirmed. 15-year-old Kira Molina of Noonan, Georgia, died after first testing negative for influenza.
Miss Molina succumbed to liver failure due to the flu.
A 4-year-old girl in New Jersey and a 10-year-old boy in California, both also succumbing to the flu. This doctor in New York saying this influenza season is now serious.
Yeah, it's severe now. It's certainly severe now.
According to the Centers for Disease Control, the proportion of people seeing their health care provider for flu-like illness at the end of January was 6.6%, the highest recorded since the 2009 pandemic. In Marietta, Georgia, 5-year-old Eli Snook died due to flu complications. He had even briefly returned to school after 2 weeks of symptoms before taking a turn for the worse.
School called me and said that he had 101-degree fever.
Some doctors and clinics now offering free flu shots to help curb the epidemic. But Dr. Firestein telling us if you feel you're coming down with it, getting medical treatment quickly is key.
If somebody feels that they're getting sick, they should go see a doctor, and they don't need a test to be treated.
That was Linda Lopez reporting. Still ahead, held in Iran, the wife of a former FBI agent gives us an update on his status more than 10 years after he disappeared. And a silent protest, why women across Iran are removing their headscarves. That's coming up on Clearcut.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know. Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
tiene el escudo nacional.
Welcome back to Clearcut. There could be another round of United States government sanctions against Iran because of what members of Congress call hostages held in that country. I-24 News senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv reports.
Among all the reasons American politicians give for proposing additional sanctions, the fact that Iran is holding 5 U.S. citizens and 2 green card holders on what the United States government considers weak or false charges. Some members of Congress call them hostages, reminiscent of the more than 50 U.S. diplomats who were prisoners in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran for nearly 15 months, a crisis that ended with their release in January 1981. The Americans now held include 4 dual citizens of the United States and Iran, such as Karan Vafadari, sentenced to 27 years in prison. He and his Iranian wife had an art gallery in Tehran. Their alleged crimes include contact with foreign diplomats. Also, Shi Yue Wang, born in China, a U.S. citizen who's a graduate student at Princeton. He was arrested in Iran while doing research, charged with spying for the CIA. Last summer, he got a 10-year prison sentence. The most mysterious case is that of Robert Levinson, a retired FBI agent. He also worked for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. 11 years ago, as a private investigator looking into cigarette smuggling in the Middle East, Levinson disappeared while on an island in Iran. Iran's authorities offer cooperation but claim they know nothing.
I believe that the government knows where he is, that they've always known where he is. I don't know what it's going to take to get him home, but whatever it takes, the United States government and the Iranian government need to figure it out and get the job done.
That's Christine Levinson of Coral Springs, Florida, noting that after 3 years of no information, somebody, the kidnappers, the Iranian government, sent the family a video of her husband in captivity, but no explanation or ransom demand.
I believe he's alive, and I'll never change my opinion till I hear for sure and have some proof that he has passed away.
President George W. Bush tried to help. So did Barack Obama and his Secretary of State, John Kerry, who tried to have a friendly relationship with Iran. Was that better for the Levinsons than the current total hostility to Iran by the Trump administration?
He's an American citizen, and on that basis alone, he should come home.
Mrs. Levinson visited Congress this week, a guest at the State of the Union address, invited by her member of Congress, Democrat Ted Deutsch.
I'm not suggesting that the president should offer something. I just want to be sure that they're exploring every possibility. When an American is held hostage, it should matter to all Americans.
Deutsch is a co-sponsor of the Iran Human Rights and Hostage-Taking Accountability Act that would ban any financial transactions and any travel by officials in Iran believed to be involved in improperly imprisoning Americans.
And staying in Iran, there is a new movement there, a quiet protest circulating in the streets. Women are removing their headscarves. It's a silent and peaceful demonstration against the ultra-religious government. Our international affairs correspondent Bianca Zanini has more.
Something is happening in Iran. Women are climbing utility boxes or benches in the middle of traffic and taking off their headscarves, waving it calmly on a stick as a symbol of the freedom they don't have. They stay there no more than a few minutes, just enough time for people to take pictures, to film it, and put it on social media. But even those short minutes can be dangerous. Iranian women can be arrested for not following the strict Islamic law to cover their hair.
What's happening right now is because of social media and satellite TV, internet, and all the communication technology that's all around us, women, even in rural areas, are learning new things, newer things, and they're learning about their own rights.
The women are joining the movement #Girls of Revolution Street. It started in the very end of December when this photo of 31-year-old Vida Mohamed went viral. She became the face of the massive anti-regime protests that swept the country in the end of the year, where more than 1,000 were arrested and at least 20 people killed. Vida Mohamed was also arrested, sparking the viral campaign, "Where is she?" According to a human rights lawyer, she was freed late last week.
What women are doing right now in Iran is, although you could just say it's for hijab, but no, it's for so many things, but it's going to be through opposing mandatory hijab. They have been harassed, they have been assaulted, they have been under pressure. This movement, if you will, you can possibly call it a sort of a Me Too movement as well for Iranian women.
While women in the US, Europe, and in Israel are uniting around the Me Too campaign and saying time's up, women in Iran are very literally stepping up, even when it's difficult, to silently, defiantly, and bravely call out, "We have the right to decide." Bianca Zanini, I-24 News.
Still ahead here on Clearcut, women in the military, why some influential voices are questioning their place in Israel's defense force.
I'm Tracy Alexander for I-24 News. Join us on Perspectives and get the whole picture as we break down the day's top stories from all angles.
I-24 News.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Rabbis are not happy about Israeli military's focus on expanding positions for women. Some of them have encouraged women to refrain from enlisting. Others have called for the IDF leaders to be fired. I-24 News correspondent Daniel Tzemach has more.
The IDF has been taking strides to further integrate females into combat roles in the army. Mixed battalions like Caracal, Bardalas, Lions of the Jordan, and Lions of the Jordan Valley, just to name a few, were established in the last few years. The IDF makes a concerted effort to promote its inclusivity of females into different roles, posting videos of female combat soldiers on social media, statuses that say things like the female soldiers protecting Israel from ISIS, or praising the first female pilot to serve as a squadron commander in the Air Force. All attempts to display an inclusive image, one that is in line with modern trends on social media and society as a whole. Some sectors of Israeli society have taken issue with this focus and these changes, namely the leading state rabbinate. Some leading rabbis have been outspoken in their criticism of the IDF and its military chief. Rabbi Shlomo Eliyahu, the chief rabbi of the city of Tzfat, recently called for the IDF military chief, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot, to be deposed. Wednesday, he spoke again on the matter at a conference on Hebrew law in Jerusalem.
Can we sit quietly when the army has a set plan to mix throughout the entire army, both boys and girls? They boast that they've already managed 90%, and they hope for 100. Can someone here sit quietly? Is it the way of the Torah? The way of the Torah is exactly the opposite.
While Rabbi Eliyahu does not represent the entire population of religious Jews in Israel, far from it, he was indeed supported by around 100 other rabbis who wrote to Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman Wednesday, criticizing him for his decision to ban 3 rabbis from IDF events because of the comments against the military chief. Meanwhile, right-leaning Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has a powerful coalition of ultra-Orthodox party members, said he was, quote, proud of IDF's integration of women into various roles, including combat. Meanwhile, the IDF is declining to comment on the matter. But it seems that policies on integration of women into combat roles is creating a rift in Israeli society. Daniel Tzemach, I-24 News.
And as we wrap up the show, let's take a look at some headlines from around the globe in our World Wrap. In Kenya, the government shut down 3 independently owned TV stations after they broadcast a political stunt. The country's opposition leaders staged an unofficial swearing-in ceremony. Several journalists say they spent the night in their newsrooms over fear of arrest. In Bolivia, flooding forced about 50,000 people from their homes. Heavy rains in the country sent rivers over their banks and into communities. The military is helping the hardest hit areas near the southern border. In China, President Xi Jinping met with British Prime Minister Theresa May for, of course, a cup of tea. Excuse me. China and the UK are 2 of the world's biggest consumers of tea, while in China, May hopes to sign $12 billion worth of economic deals. So this also happened. A couple of inventive wakeboarders made the best of a tough time in France. The teens took their gear to the flooded streets of their neighborhood outside Paris. They performed tricks between the trees and street signs. The nearby river Seine spilled over its banks about a week ago. The water is starting to recede, but not before these guys got to have a good time with the bad weather. Well, and that is Clearcut. We would love to hear your comments. Feel free to reach out by writing to us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tal Henrik, in for Michelle today. Good night.